as I mentioned, we're going to be doing these highlight videos here from ATS.io radio, talking about some highlight topics, some highlight games, stuff like that. We certainly encourage you, if you're only watching the video, to listen to the full podcast. There's a ton of great information. We're only cutting out some snippets here so that we can produce some video content and a video component from the podcast here, like so many other podcasts in the space are doing. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here with you, Brad, and I'm chatting with Brad Powers, professional handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. Home field advantage. It's an inexact science to begin with. We all kind of have our own approach, our own plan for doing it. But this year, you've got some teams that have no attendance whatsoever, some teams that have maybe 25% capacity, where that could mean 20,000 or it could mean 6,000. So what did you do in terms of trying to account for home field advantage here for this college football season?
So as usual, case-by-case basis for me. I'm not handicapping baseball and a bunch of other sports. So instead of just saying, not having fans deduct home field advantage a point and a half, I went through and looked at each team. And you're exactly right. 25,000 people are going to be in Baton Rouge because it's 25%. If it's somewhere a much smaller stadium, it might be a couple thousand. So big difference there. And just typically, Eastern Michigan, no fans are going to be, I know they're not playing, so this might not be a great example, but like a team like Eastern Michigan or a Sunbelt school that's only going to have 5,000 fans in the stands. I mean, the fans weren't even really accounting for the home field advantage to begin with. So I didn't do a major downgrade on a lot of those. But if you're talking teams like an LSU, if the Big Ten ever decides to play a Penn State at night in a whiteout, taking the fans out of those types of situations is worth 2-3 points, in my opinion. So overall, blanket statement, I downgraded home field advantage probably about 40%, taking fans out of it.
Yeah, that was sort of in the realm of what I did. I mean, generally speaking, I go with the standard 3. And then as I talked about on Monday on our show with Kyle Hunter, which I encourage everyone to go back and check out, I talked about how, I've sort of done a results-based home field advantage calculation of the last 3 years, straight up and against the spread, putting teams in certain buckets, going from 3 to 3.5, 3.5 to 4, even have some teams down as low as 2 that just don't really have home field advantage to begin with. And that kind of brings up sort of an interesting point here. And, we won't really know this until we see it, but the idea of, as you mentioned, teams that already don't have much of a crowd anyway, everybody's desperate to be out doing something now because so many people have been, locked up or quarantined or just have kind of shied away from crowds or whatever else. Those teams that maybe get 6,000 fans at 25% capacity may actually get 6,000 fans because people just want to do something and they'll be excited to be doing something. So the ironic thing is, in some of the really small conferences, home field advantage may not change at all, and you could make a case could be better. Now, for the major conferences, getting 20,000 instead of 80,000, yeah, that's a pretty big difference and deserves a downgrade.
Absolutely. And I think we saw a great example from this past weekend where Army typically gets a solid crowd, but they just had the cadets in attendance. They spread them out. They basically took up half the side of one side of the stadium, and there was 4,000 of them. And I don't know if they were pumping in extra crowd noise, and that's another factor you got to almost consider. You almost got to see it first and then make your adjustments after 1 or 2 weeks, Adam. But those 4,000 cadets in attendance, it was loud. It was noticeable watching it on TV. It's not like Middle Tennessee was using a bunch of timeouts to account for it, but it certainly showed up, at least watching it on TV. So you're exactly right. I mean, some of the smaller stadiums might be not much of a difference whatsoever when it comes to crowd noise.
Not to go off on a tangent, but speaking of Middle Tennessee not using timeouts, you had a great video on your Twitter page at Brad Powers and the number 7 with your commentary on Middle Tennessee State, and not just the calculation of home field advantage, but what it means from a gameplay standpoint. I talked with Brian Blessing. We did a couple of videos on Tuesday, and he thinks that at least as far as the NFL goes, a road team's third down conversion rates could be a lot better here. In this neutered home field advantage environment where the fans aren't loud. You can communicate, you can talk to each other, you can make sure that you're on the same page. So, yeah, you've got your calculation in terms of creating your numbers, but what do you think about gameplay and the impact of home field advantage or the lack thereof here for this college football season?
Well, that first and foremost, that's a really sharp take to go in as far as third down conversions, because I'm not sure yet. All of this is theory because none of us have handicapped the COVID-19, but do road teams do better? Because I mean, you're not having to do silent counts and whatnot as far as the snap goes, and you're not dealing with those third down sort of say I would looking at it, you're dealing with third and 10 more manageable now because there's no crowd noise. It could be scoring wise offensively. Offense is going to be affected, specifically road offenses. Probably not as much. So the tough thing is not a lot of in-game opportunities, specifically on the college side, to see if you can take advantage of it. But just general concepts for me, maybe more scoring, because I think offenses are affected by crowds, in my opinion, and maybe I would say road teams just generally performing above expectation.
Well, and I think it favors offense for another reason too. Not even just third down when the fans kind of get going and they're playing graphics on the scoreboard and all that. And again, I mean, 20,000 people can be pretty damn loud. So we'll see what happens in these major conferences. But also too, you're not going to see as many false starts probably. You're not going to be behind schedule as much. You're not going to go from 2nd and 4 to 2nd and 9 and all of a sudden put yourself, behind schedule, behind the chains a little bit, so to speak. So maybe that's something that kind of just is a byproduct that winds up helping offense a little bit. Again, as you said, this is all speculatory at this point in time. We have to see how things kind of play out. But these are things that you want to have in the back of your mind here as you're watching these games, as you're following along, and see if this is actually what's happening or if it's something different than you expected. Because, again, we're all kind of going through this feeling out process here, and there's always a feeling out process early in the season, but clearly this year different from others.
Absolutely, it is. That's why in some instances, I've been more cautious, less aggressive than what I have been. In other instances, I've not been afraid to fire away if I think I really have an advantage.
Well, like we said, we're going to be doing these highlight video clips here from ATS.io radio and posting them over on our ATS YouTube page. So make sure you check those out with every show. But of course, as we said, you want to listen to the full shows so you don't miss anything. And you can subscribe on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever it is you get your podcast content.